I'm talking today with Jason Everett, president of Business Refuel. And this is a high energy, jam-packed interview, so you won't want to miss a minute. We talk about how we all make our worst fears come true when it comes to objections and how to stop doing that. Jason actually shares the worst objection he ever faced, and it is a doozy. And he really used the experience to advance his own objection handling, so we can learn from his horror story. We learn how we need to flip-flop our selling to training ratio, and that's very interesting, probably controversial, so you'll have to give me some feedback on that one. And Jason offers up a tool sheet of the top 15 objections that he's faced and his best advice for dealing with them. So let's dive in. Hi, we're here today with Jason Everett. And Jason, I love finding unique approaches to how do we manage objections, both from the prospect's perspective, but also from our own perspective. And I know you talk about something you call the excuse auction. Can you share with us what that's about?
Yeah, so the excuse auction is something that I learned a long time ago, but the basics of the excuse auction is there's this kind of silent auction that happens all the time where people give excuses and you either accept them or you don't. And there's some things that you can do actually behind the scenes to make sure that you never get those excuses in the first place, so you can abolish them forever if you kind of learn a couple of tips and a couple of secrets to help you to do that. So I'd love to talk to you about that.
Okay, so when you say auction, what makes it an auction for you?
Yeah, great question. So I'll tell you the story of kind of where this came from, and I think that'll help kind of frame it out. Is I used to work for a sales organization, and one of the bosses that I worked for, he had like a no excuse policy at all whatsoever. And so when people would come to work, if they were late or they weren't able to deliver on something or whatever, there was just no excuses. You were basically fired on the spot if you were late for things. And one day there was a girl who came into work for us, and she came into work and she showed up late on her like 5th day of work. And everybody around me had a heart attack. They were like, oh my gosh, there's no way she's going to survive the day. And she comes out of the meeting with the boss because she was late and she still worked there. And I just thought, okay, well, what happened? She must have said something magical. Now, at the time, she was a single mom and had issues with her kids at home that morning, and that caused her to be late. Now, I've never heard of an excuse that was reasonable, and don't get me wrong, I have a baby, and I can't imagine being a single parent. Like, that could be the most stressful thing on planet Earth. So I don't mean to let that excuse not be valid, but it was the first time I'd ever seen a crack in his exterior. And so kind of continued to go on, and that excuse constantly became something for him that he would accept. As if it was a kid-related issue, he would accept it. And so I started really looking for, in the sales process, in management, where is it that people kind of have this line where they decide to buy or not buy? Okay? And so what I started to notice as patterns, as being in sales training for the last 15 years, is that almost all of us have a limit of an excuse that we're willing to accept. So in a sales process, it could be when somebody says, oh, it's too expensive, and you go, oh man, yeah, I believe that, it is too expensive, and so you'll kind of let them off the hook. So the secret here, and I'll get to you really early, is that the secret to winning at the excuse auction is to stop being an auctioneer. Because the auctioneer has something that they can sell, and they're waiting to hit it a price that they're willing to sell it at, whether it's time or interest or etc. So for people that are kind of playing in this excuse auction and are kind of moving forward in a way that would prevent them from taking in those excuses, they've got to stop being willing to accept them. There's some steps I can give you on how to do that. But are you with me so far on all that?
I am. If I understand right, it's almost like the prospect is selling you objections, and it's up to you whether you're going to buy it or not, and you can reject it.
Exactly. And so, for a lot of people, it's that you can just literally say, you gotta turn the sales process around. See, most people, you think of like American Idol as an example, is most people think that if you're the salesperson, you're the one up on stage tap dancing and hoping to get that ticket to Vegas, right? But it's totally reverse. You got to completely turn around your thinking. And instead of you being the person up on stage tap dancing, you got to put your prospect up on that stage and let them tap dance for you, which is, I know, something that you talk about, is how do you get your marketing process and your systems that help get them to that phone call and that prospecting appointment with you? How do you make sure that process sells them so that it's reversed? It's the other way around, so that you're more like Simon Cowell sitting back and having that conversation with them instead of trying to be the auctioneer hoping that you're going to sell that product. It's a totally reverse thought process than traditional sales.
It really puts a sales rep in the power frame and in the best mindset when they're not the one being screened. They're the ones screening, who do I want to do business with?
Right, you should be interviewing. And I think what happens, and I come from outside sales where they literally handed me a phone book and said, start calling the A's. If you're still here when you get to the B's, we'll give you some training. Like, that's my sales background. And I still am alive, and I'm here, and I teach people to sell every single day. But the challenge with that is it really puts you on the process where you're desperate and you're looking for sales, and you kind of have that commission breath thing going on where you're running around looking for people who can buy from you because you're desperate, as opposed to saying, hey, I have an amazing product that solves a problem for my prospect, and I want to see if it's a good fit for them, and if it is, then we'll do a deal. And you're in that interviewing position as opposed to trying to be in the auctioneer, like, I hope you buy this from me, and I'm going to keep auctioning it off. And hopefully you won't give me a difficult excuse or an objection that'll stop me from selling to you. Does that make sense? Like, it's a total turnaround for me.
Yeah, exactly. So, Jason, I'm sure that, which actually keeps us all employed, that you come across a lot of sales reps that really hit the wall of fear when objections come up. And I know you specialize in how do you unleash somebody's hidden performance potential. So if you're dealing with somebody that's just burying themselves in fear, or is the rest of the office wondering, how is that single mom selling a story in with our boss right now?
Right, exactly.
How do you unlock the hidden potential in those folks?
Yeah, great question. So there's a couple things. First of all, the biggest problem that comes up is people don't see it as just an objection. They typically see it as a personal rejection. Okay, and that's one of the biggest things, is that if you cannot take it personally when somebody gives you that objection, that's the first thing that you can do, is don't take it personally. And again, it's easy to say, it is extremely hard to teach. And so there's actually ways that you can do that through practice and repetition, where you actually role play the objections. And I'm a huge role play fanatic, and I know there's a lot of people that are like, I friggin' hate role play, like it is just, it's uncomfortable and it's ugly and whatever. So, but here's the deal. You're practicing on people with real money in their pocket every single day if your first practice is the first sales call you make of the day. Right. So you already are practicing, but why would you practice on people who have money in their wallet ready to give it to you, instead of practicing with your partner, with a friend, in some sort of objection handling, role play and practice? Why don't you get that practice in? So my quickest tip I could possibly give you is you got to role play and you've got to practice so that when you hear that objection, it doesn't stump you or put you into what's called goldfish mode, where it's like somebody throws the objection at you and you're like, and you have nothing to say, and then 5 minutes later, you go, oh, you know what I should have said? I wish I would have said whatever it was.
I love that. And yeah, your best friends and colleagues can throw the worst at you. So then you figure, okay, I've already handled the worst. What could a prospect possibly do?
Right. And so what I tell people is you should practice way above, and your practice should be way harder than it is when you get on the phone with somebody. Because, like, look, I like to say I like to eat objections for breakfast. Is like, if you wake up and eat objections, then they're not a big deal. But if you're afraid of them, guess what happens? If you're panicked, I hope they don't ask me about price. I hope they don't say anything about price. I really hope they don't bring anything about price. You're actually putting out into the universe, like, ask me about price. And so what ends up happening is all of a sudden that customer goes, you know what, Mary, I think the thing that's really concerning for me is it's got to be the price. And all of a sudden you on the inside are panicking. You're like, oh, no, right? It's like that. Don't do it. And that's where I say is, like, when you're the auctioneer, you're constantly thinking about those things in your mind. It's like, I hope they buy, I hope they buy, I hope they buy. And that, again, that's a wrong attitude to go into it with. So if you practice, and you practice asking good questions to qualify, by the way, a good friend of mine who's actually, I think, done some interviews with you too, is a guy named Blair Singer.
Yes.
Do you know Blair Singer?
Yes.
Blair's a good friend of mine. He's been a business partner of mine for a long time. This is his system. I want to make sure he gets full credit for it. Is he has a really good process for handling objections. It's really simple, 2 steps. It's you acknowledge and you ask a question. Super basic, easy process. I teach people how to use that specifically. And Blair Singer has written some great books. You can check those out. But his process is really simple. I love teaching people that. Acknowledge and ask a question. And usually an open-ended question is best. But if you get into the habit of acknowledging, asking a question, acknowledging, asking a question, and you put yourself in the position of being, instead of being the auctioneer, you just completely get rid of the auctioneer and you start interviewing the client like you would on American Idol, totally transforms the sales process from being an uncomfortable, fear-based position into being just honestly what it is helping somebody see what they need and letting them get access to it, because you're the gatekeeper, not the auctioneer.
Exactly. When I interviewed Blair, you're bringing back good memories. That was a fun interview. He talked about the fact he had a mastermind group. Perhaps you're a part of it. And they would get together weekly and just hammer each other to try to set off each other's hot buttons. You know, exactly what you're recommending, so that when they're in a real situation, they've already dealt with the worst. You know, you can't possibly get them to flinch. So I'm curious, if you were hammering on one of your own clients to really set off their hot buttons and teach them how to manage through that, what's a tough situation you would throw at somebody to practice?
Yeah, well, so the way you would get like even more intense practice is you start making them really personal. Does that make sense? Mm-hmm. I'll tell you the worst objection I ever got, and man, did it get me hot on the inside, is I walked into this guy's, I cold calls because I was doing a bunch of cold call. I walked into this building, and the guy, not only did he say, "I'm not interested," but he said, and more importantly, "I think what you're doing is wrong. I think you should get out of the industry. I think you're horrible at it, and you should quit today."
Thank you very much. Have a nice day.
Yeah, like I was like, wow, talk about like personally attacking my life choice of like being in sales, you know? And obviously, look, I've always had a outgoing personality, and you know, people usually say like, "Oh, you must be in sales because you're pretty outgoing," and they usually guess that question, you know. And for people watching, like I think that would be the same thing. Is if you're watching this, you probably have somewhat of a personality too. But if you don't, and those objections still scare the heck out of you, you know, what do you do when people like that throw things at you? So the way to get really advanced with your objection handling is to start making it personal, and you really start also looking at what are the objections. And this is my other tip on kind of advanced objection handling, is you got to ask yourself this question, and hopefully you can write this down, put it somewhere, is that you ask yourself the question, what objections do I most often give other people when I buy something?
Oh, that's good. And start cataloging for yourself. Yeah,
so you say, so if my biggest objection is price, guess what objection I'm most often going to hear from people?
Okay.
Okay.
And then what would win me over?
Right. So sorry, say it again.
And then as a follow-up, what would win me over?
Well, yeah, possible. It's like, well, how? So if you say, well, what objection do I most often give? Is that's usually the objection you most often get. So what I tell people is, how do you figure out a way to remove that objection from your life and not give it anymore?
Okay.
So again, when we talk about going back to like to handling the objection before it even comes up, that's the best time to handle an objection.
Okay.
Right. And so if you get rid of giving that excuse, going back to the auctioneer scenario, you will less often get it. I'll give you a perfect scenario. Yeah, I know, right? It's kind of an interesting way to deal with it. It's not like what do you say, it's what are you doing with your entire life in advance prior to getting into that objection. It's very different, yeah?
Yeah.
So I'll give you an example. I used to work with Massage Envy. And Massage Envy, I worked with about 100 different locations. We helped increase their sales by millions of dollars because their front desk people are usually not trained sales professionals. These are usually like first or second job people. They've never been in sales, but they control access to growing a multi-million-dollar business with, you know, minimum wage employees at the front desk. Mm-hmm. Okay? So they asked us to come in and do sales. And one of the most common objections, as you would imagine, if you're talking to a 20-something-year-old girl or 20-something-year-old guy, and you're trying to buy a $60 or $100 membership every month, what do you think the most common objection they got was? It's too
expensive.
Of course. Now, everybody who works at the front desk of Massage Envy most often cannot afford a membership personally. So when somebody says it's too expensive, in their mind, what do you think they immediately do?
Of course it is. You have to be,
I know. Money's really tight right now. It's tough. Boom, sucker, you bought it.
Yeah.
You were the auctioneer that just bought that objection. Does that make sense? And so what we started to do is say, okay, well, how can you change how you respond to things that are expensive in your life? How do you respond to it? And then how do you, again, going back to Blair's point, how do you acknowledge and ask a really good question? Is even just acknowledging and saying, well, I completely understand how you feel. What other things in your life do you pay for that give you the type of benefit that you would get from getting a massage? Ask an open-ended question, right? Is it all of a sudden you get them back involved in the sales process because it's that split second after the objection comes up and the prospect can read it on your face. Like, did they sell you or not?
Mm-hmm.
And if they know that they're like, I read people all the time. I walk in and I'm like, oh, okay, I can tell. If I say this is too expensive, I'm going to get no resistance at all whatsoever. And I can tell, right? I can tell that person's going to take that objection because I know that they're the auctioneer at that point and there's a buy price. And I can usually see where their buy price is. People do that to you all the time.
Well, that helps me understand why, because, I feel so sorry for their companies, but how often I may just have a slight delay and they take my slight delay as an objection and start offering me discounts.
Oh my God. Let's go the other way and say, how do you want to get the best discount on earth? Just shut your mouth, don't say anything, and be a pain in the butt as a prospect. The one thing I know about sales is it taught me every objection that I could possibly use to give somebody a hard time. That more than anything, that's what I've got out of sales. But yes, to your point, is silence is the greatest panicker. So if you can keep your cool in that moment when that objection gets thrown at you, keys of the kingdom. That's it. If you can keep your cool, which is what that practice is all about, is by practicing and by using those tools to just feel comfortable and confident so that you don't panic if they're quiet, or you don't panic if they throw you an objection, that in the back of your mind you're worried they're not going to throw you. It really does give you that power back. Mm-hmm. And again, the only way you can kind of get numb to something like that is through repetition. That's it. You've got to get that repetition in.
So Jason, a lot of what we're talking about is basic human nature that you need to learn to work with and manage effectively. But I can't help thinking that there's some generational differences too in how we process objections. You think Depression era, how are you going to get them to, feel like a luxury is worth, spending money on? Do you see a difference with millennials selling and also selling to millennials as an example?
Yeah, so it's a great question. So there's a huge gap between even just you talk baby boomers selling. They each have their own process, but there's something that monstrously changed in business about 10 years ago. And there's people who are kind of selling the old regime of sales, which is like, if they've been training since 1980 and they've been doing it for that long, just be aware. I hope they've updated their systems because for me, I'm a younger guy, I'm 34, okay? And I'm at this weird generational age. It's called, by the way, the Oregon Trail generation. I don't know if you've heard of said generation. Look it up. Basically, it means there was a group of people that are about 4 years kind of plus and minus, about 2 years plus and minus me. I'm right smack dab in the middle. Called the Oregon Trail generation. It means that in elementary school, we actually grew up with computers and we grew up playing this game called Oregon Trail. It's a game so anyway, there's a game that's in there. So if you talk to somebody who's from my generation, plus or minus a few years, they definitely know what you're talking about. And it's a generation that grew up with computers and without computers, and we're split in the middle.
Okay.
Millennials, that they've grown up and they've had computers their whole life, and then there's a generation of people that didn't have computers until after they graduated and after in post school. So I'm in this weird bridge gap generation, again called Oregon Trail, and what it kind of gives me this unique perspective is I can see both sides. I kind of sit on the fence in the middle, and I go, I understand that, and I definitely understand that. So let me explain the biggest difference that I see between millennials and baby boomers or even Gen X. Is that the biggest thing is Gen X and baby boomers have spent all of their time researching, learning, and understanding the best way that's been proven over time to do something, right? And so they value mentorships and learning the right process and the right way to do it. And when you find a tried and true proven process, you repeat it. Okay? Then you look at millennials, and millennials come from a generation where everything has been reinvented from scratch. And you've got people that go, oh, that old way you used to do things is totally garbage. That's why we reinvented it. So when you have them work together, one of the biggest challenges is you've got somebody who is more Gen X or baby boomer generation saying, let me show you how we've done it forever. And you've got that millennial person that's like, but that's the reason why it's dumb is you've been doing it forever. See where that creates huge conflict for anybody who's in that older generation compared to who's in this younger generation. And then you create all this frustration for those people who are trying to get that training across to them, because the problem is they don't want to hear what you've been doing since 1980. They want to know the new thing that you don't know about yet. And then the baby boomers are like, well, I don't want to do the new thing because it's not tried, it's not true, it's not tested. So does that make sense?
Yeah, it does. It makes me think of, oh my goodness, the poor sales reps that are presenting their 105-year-old legacy as a company selling to a millennial that's thinking, well, why haven't you died yet?
Yeah, exactly. If you're not new, then you're not with it, and I don't care. But so I gave you that long explanation. I know we're probably going super long, but hopefully this is valuable for everybody that's watching, is that So here's what you need to know. The game changed in sales when the internet came on the scene, and really in the last 5 to 7 years, it's really changed. And there's some TED Talks on this. You can Google it and figure it out. I actually can't remember the author, so I'm sorry I can't give credit. But the game has changed from a buyer beware market to a seller beware market. Have you heard that before?
Mm-hmm.
Right?
I think it was in the Why. I can't think of the guy's name either.
Yeah, it might be Daniel Pink, start with Why. I can't remember where it is. You'll have to dig it up. And like I said, I want to give credit. If it's not my concept, I'll tell you, right? Is it switched from a buyer beware market to a seller beware market.
That was Dan Pink, yes.
Okay, I'm pretty sure.
Human.
Thank you. I knew it was in there.
Yeah.
So anyway, buyer beware versus seller beware. And so when the market changed, you've got all these millennials that usually know more when they walk into the store than the person trying to sell them on the other side of the counter, right? And so that's a huge problem if you're talking about trying to sell with millennials, like having millennials as your salespeople, or because what happens is as millennial tech generation that is used to hiding behind their cell phone and having texts, and they get to and going back to tying this to sales, right, is that when they do, when they communicate right now, they're used to seeing a text come in, pausing, thinking about it, deciding exactly what they want to say, formulating their text, and replying. That's a very common communication. And so now you put them in that real world where somebody says, hey, I think it's too expensive, and they go, okay, hold on. Too expensive. Where's that? Okay, this is what I want to. That doesn't happen. You can't do that in real life, right? So what happens is they panic because their level of confrontation is way lower than somebody in their late 30s, 40s, and 50s, where you're used to picking up the phone and calling somebody because that's what you used to have to do. This whole texting and sending an email, that's all new stuff. I mean, I wasn't really even using email in business until I was probably in my mid 20s. And even then, that we were sending out etiquette things about how to use email and what's appropriate for email. Now, for crying out loud, I send out text messages and get people to buy from me via text messages. That's crazy. But again, they have a lower capacity to confront if they're millennial generation, which means they need practice more than anybody else. They need more practice than anybody else because their level of confront is so much lower, and they'll panic. And millennials, when they panic, they retreat. And there's tons of ways for them to retreat, offline, on Facebook. But here's the other tip I'll give you. They're amazing people to help you set up your marketing funnels and your sales funnels and your sequences and your online things because they can do it behind the scenes and they can spend time thinking about it instead of doing that confrontation. So I'm not saying they can't do it. They just need probably 10 times more practice than somebody who's in their late 30s and into their 40s. Does that help a little bit?
You know, it's a fascinating perspective because the typical message out there is that the internet has sped up everything and that communication is real time. And there's certainly a place where that's true, but it's not as real time as a face-to-face conversation, and you don't get the pause, think, you have to be responding.
Yeah, and the only way you can do that, my background, by the way, is before I got into sales and business, is I used to do improv and sketch comedy. Okay, that's what I used to do and originally. I used to do a ton of acting. And that gave me amazing tools to be able to think on my feet. And when somebody throws something at you in comedy, like you're on stage, you're live, you're in front of people, you got to be able to do something with it right away, and there's no hesitation. And so that's what gave me my skill set in order to be able to handle objections very well and move forward on all those things, because they spend an entire week practicing for a 1-hour show at the end of the week on a Saturday. The problem is, most salespeople that are watching this video, you spend all week selling, and you might practice for an hour. Wrong direction. You got to flip-flop your practice. You should be practicing more than you're selling. That's a big thought. And for most companies, they don't support that. They're like, get out there and sell and go do that 30-minute training once a week, and I hope that helps.
Right.
Got to reverse that thinking in order to be productive.
Excellent. Yeah. That's going to twist around people's calendars quite a bit there.
For sure. And it's not always realistic, but if you can at least have the understanding that you're going to practice a greater amount than you're going to sell, that can be good. Or on the sales appointment, you spend 30 minutes practicing before you have your 30-minute sales appointment. That could be good too.
Right. So Jason, what would you say is the most important thing that our audience should do right now on their next sales call so that they're more effective with managing their objections?
Awesome. So what I would do, and I recommend this for everybody, is write down your top 5 or top 10, really, if you're good at it. The top 10 objections that you think you're going to get from this prospect. And if you know this prospect well, great. If not, at least use your top 10 generic ones that you get most often. Write them down and practice each one of them a minimum of 5 to 10 times. Just practice, role play it, do it, whatever. It's really hard to do it by yourself, so it's important that you have a live person because that raises that level of confront and it becomes more.
You get the emotional trigger.
Right, you got to get that emotional trigger. But at very minimum, walk through those objections and practice being rapid fire, handling it and practicing it until you feel like, okay, I got that one. That one, if it comes up, I'm not really worried about it. Mm-hmm. And one other thing I'll say, don't try and solve the objection. Just try to put just try to put the energy back on them instead of the pressure back on you.
Okay.
That's it. That's all you're trying to do. Don't try and solve it. And that's why I think everybody panics, because they think they have to solve it. All you have to do is get it back to them. Think of it like hot potato, right? Is that they've thrown you a potato. Your job is to get it back to them as soon as possible. Right? So they go, it's too expensive. And you go, oh, okay, awesome. Why do you think it's too expensive? That's it. And then let them throw the hot potato to you, right? So whoever the question sits with, it's burning their hands, not yours. It takes the pressure off of you. Yeah?
That's
perfect.
What
I would say. Practice them. Did I mention practice them?
Yes.
And then make sure that you have your top 10. And if you get really good at those 10, you start getting new ones, write those down and then practice those so they stop coming up. And then the second piece is look at the objections you give most often and stop it. Stop giving those objections. Even if you have to say something else, just stop giving those objections because most likely those are the ones that you're buying from your customers because you believe them.
Okay. Well, we'll be watching for you to take out the brand hot potato technique.
Yeah, that might be the coming soon, hot potato technique.
I love it. Well, thanks so much, Jason, for sharing your wisdom. So helpful.
Absolutely. And hey, I just wanted to let you know too, if anybody's interested in getting I've got a tip and a tool sheet that they can actually get. Are you okay if I give it to you? That'd be okay. So we put together actually the 15 most common objections and how you abolish them forever. I put together it's a quick PDF sheet. So if they're stuck and they can't think of any objections that come to mind, or they want to know what are the most common ones that come up, they can click on the link on the page, or they can follow the click-through link that should be around, and then they can actually get that report totally for free, and then they can use that. That'll help spark some of that idea for them. So if that works, I really appreciate you letting me give that away and being a good resource for people, because I believe that if I'm a good resource, then it all will come back to me. So I hope that's helpful.
Excellent. Love it. Thanks for offering that.
No problem.
Super. Well, thanks so much again, Jason. You take care.
It was my pleasure, Mary. Thanks so much.
Bye-bye. Don't you just feel smarter already? I tell you, with all of the interviews that I've done for Sales Mastery, most days I feel like I can conquer the world. If you want to make sure to catch all of our interviews with chief sales officers, experts, top sales producers, connect with us on our YouTube channel right here. And if you want access to all of the resources that we have for you at Sales Mastery, you can connect with us right here. Our goal is to make it fun and to make it simple for you to stay on the leading edge of selling. So connect with Sales Mastery for the smart way for you to become your best.